The city was already buzzing that morning. Cars crawled through traffic, horns blaring, and people hurried down the sidewalks, clutching coffee cups and phones like lifelines. On the corner, pressed against a brick wall, sat an old man. His coat hung loose on his frail frame, his shoes were worn thin, and his grey stubble shadowed a face carved with years of exhaustion. In his arms, he cradled a battered leather suitcase, the handle frayed, the seams cracked, the lock rusted from time. Most people passed without even a glance. One man clipped his shoulder, spilling hot coffee across the old man's coat. Instead of apologising, he sneered, "Watch where you're sitting," before rushing off. A group of teenagers laughed as they passed, one of them pretending to kick at the suitcase before darting away. Through it all, the old man didn't lift his head. He only pulled the suitcase tighter against his chest, as if it was the only part of his life he had left to protect. To the crowd, he was invisible. But to anyone who truly looked, the way he clung to that case told a different story. Whatever was inside meant everything to him. And that mystery, the quiet desperation in his grip, was enough to make anyone wonder. What could an old man guard so fiercely, when the rest of the world had already taken everything else? By the next morning, the rush of the city had already swallowed up what happened on that corner. People who spilled coffee or laughed the day before didn't give the old man a second thought. But he was still there, in the same spot, suitcase locked in his arms. To most, he was part of the scenery, like a cracked sidewalk or a broken sign no one bothered to fix. Some whispered as they passed, curious for a second. "Bet he's got cash in there," one man muttered. A teenager once bragged to his friends that he'd tried to snatch it, but the old man clutched it so hard his hands turned white. He didn't shout, didn't fight back, but the terror in his eyes made them back off, and when the crowd moved on, he was invisible again. Nobody knew his name, where he came from, or why that suitcase seemed more valuable to him than food or shelter. But the way he held it, with arms wrapped tight and his head bent low, said it carried more than scraps. It carried a story he wasn't ready to let go of. Emma had walked that same stretch of sidewalk so many times that she barely noticed the faces anymore. Her mornings were a blur of coffee runs, traffic lights, and rushing to make it into the office before her boss started pacing the floor. But that day, something caught her. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. The same old man pressed against the wall, suitcase clutched tight like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. She'd seen him before, always in the same place, but this time she really looked. His coat was too big, his shoes nearly falling apart, and his hands trembled as he held on. People skirted around him, annoyed, muttering as if his very presence slowed them down. Emma felt her chest tighten. He reminded her of her grandfather, the way he used to sit on the porch in the evenings, quiet and proud, even when age had taken its toll. She slowed her pace, caught between the pull of the crowd and the tug in her chest. For a moment, she thought about stopping, about saying something, but the current of people pushed her forward, and she let it. As she crossed the street, she looked back once more. He hadn't moved an inch. The city had forgotten him. But she couldn't shake the thought that maybe she wasn't supposed to. The next morning, Emma left her apartment a few minutes earlier than usual. She told herself it was just so she wouldn't be late to work, but deep down she knew that wasn't true. On her way, she stopped at the corner cafe and ordered 2 sandwiches instead of 1. As she walked toward the familiar stretch of sidewalk, her heart started to race. The crowd was thick, weaving around each other, and there he was, sitting in the same spot, his suitcase balanced carefully on his knees. He looked smaller than she remembered, as if the night had taken even more out of him. Emma slowed, then stopped. People bumped her shoulder, annoyed when she broke the flow of traffic. A few glanced at her with raised brows as if to say, "Don't waste your time." She almost kept walking, almost convinced herself to let it go. But then she thought of her grandfather again, How he hated when people talked over him like he wasn't there. Emma took a deep breath, stepped out of the moving crowd, and walked toward the old man. Kneeling so she was level with him, she reached into her bag and pulled out the sandwich. "Here," she said softly, her voice barely above the city noise. For a moment he didn't move. His hands tightened around the suitcase, his body tense, his eyes wary. He shook his head slowly, as if refusing. But Emma didn't leave. She stayed there, steady and patient, the sandwich still in her hand. Emma stayed crouched on the cold sidewalk, her hand still holding out the sandwich. The old man didn't reach for it. His eyes flicked to hers for only a second before darting back down, his jaw tight. Around them, the city kept moving. Heels clicked, voices rose and fell, the smell of roasted coffee drifting from the cafe on the corner. A man muttered as he brushed past. "Some people never learn," shaking his head at both of them. Emma ignored it. She shifted slightly so she was closer, lowering her voice as if speaking to someone she already knew. "It's just a sandwich," she said gently. "Nothing more. I thought maybe you could use it." For a moment it seemed like he might refuse again. His knuckles whitened as he clutched the suitcase tighter, as though letting go would mean losing the last piece of himself. Then, slowly, his hand lifted. It trembled as it hovered over hers before finally taking the sandwich. His fingers brushed against hers, rough and cold. "Thank you," he whispered, the words gravelly, like they hadn't been used in days. Emma's chest softened. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "Everyone deserves to eat." He looked at her again, really looked this time, his eyes weary but searching, as if trying to decide whether she truly meant what she said. And in that brief silence, something shifted. He was no longer invisible. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him. George unwrapped the sandwich slowly, as if afraid it might be taken back. Each bite was small and careful, his eyes fixed on the ground. Emma didn't rush him. She stayed there, knees pressed to the pavement, letting the noise of the city wash around them. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, then rested both hands on the suitcase. His fingers lingered there, tracing the cracked leather handle. For a long time he said nothing. Then his voice broke the silence, low and uneven. "This case, it's all I've got left." Emma tilted her head, her tone gentle. "What's inside?" He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Memories, that's all." His eyes didn't lift, but his shoulders sagged as if just admitting that cost him something. Emma didn't push. She simply nodded, her voice steady. "If it matters to you, then it matters." George's throat worked, and for a moment he clutched the case tighter, as though her words had reached a part of him no one had touched in years. The crowd still moved around them, busy and distracted, but in that small space on the sidewalk, he wasn't just another man forgotten by the world. He was someone with a story, one he had just begun to share. The next morning, Emma returned with 2 cups of coffee. She knelt beside George and handed one to him. His hands shook as he wrapped them around the warm paper cup, and for a brief moment it almost felt ordinary, like 2 friends sharing breakfast before work, but not everyone saw it that way. A man in a suit walked past, glancing down his nose. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, loud enough for both of them to hear. A woman tugging her little boy along whispered sharply, "Don't stare. People like him made their choices." Emma felt the words cut the air, but she didn't move. George's shoulders slumped. He set the cup on the ground and muttered, "You don't have to do this. Folks will talk. I don't want you getting dragged into my mess." Emma leaned closer, her voice steady. "I don't care what they say." She waited until he looked at her. "You're a person, George, and you deserve better than being treated like you're invisible." For a moment, disbelief flickered across his face. His eyes glistened as if he wanted to argue, but the words never came. The suitcase rested between them, worn and silent. But in that instant, it wasn't the only thing keeping him tied to the world. Emma was. The air was colder that morning, the kind that made people bury their faces in scarves and rush past without looking around. Emma noticed George sitting lower against the wall, his shoulders curled in, the suitcase balanced carefully across his knees. She sat down beside him, pulling a folded blanket from her bag and placing it gently over his lap. For a moment he didn't react. Then his hands moved, slow and uncertain, resting on the suitcase as if he was gathering courage. "You've been kind to me when nobody else even sees me," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I should show you why I hold on to this." Emma stayed quiet, giving him space. With trembling fingers, George unlatched the rusty clasps. The hinges creaked as the lid opened, revealing not valuables or money, but a small collection of things carefully arranged. A neatly folded flannel shirt, a bundle of letters, the edges yellowed with time, and tucked into the corner, a faded photograph. He picked up the photo with both hands. The paper shook as he held it out for her to see. A younger George smiled in the picture, his arm around a woman with bright eyes, a little boy standing proudly between them. His voice cracked as he whispered, "My wife, my son, this is what I've been carrying. It's all that's left of them." Emma's throat tightened. She didn't try to fill the silence or search for the perfect words. Instead, she reached out and laid her hand gently over his, letting him know he wasn't holding that memory alone anymore. After that morning, something between them shifted. George was no longer just the man on the corner. Each day Emma stopped, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but time to sit and listen. Slowly, piece by piece, George let her glimpse the life he had once lived. The long shifts at the auto shop, the laughter of a little boy who used to run to him after work, the nights he spent in a house that no longer belonged to him. Every story circled back to the photo in the suitcase, the one reminder that he had once been more than the shadow people saw now. One afternoon, Emma set down a cup of soup beside him and hesitated. "George, there's a shelter not far from here. They help people find a place to stay, a real bed, a hot meal, even a chance to work again." The words seemed to hang heavy in the air. George's hands tightened around the suitcase. He shook his head quickly, almost panicked. "No, those places, they're for men who gave up. I don't want to be one of them." His voice cracked on the last words and he looked away, ashamed. Emma leaned closer, her tone steady but kind. "George, you haven't given up. You've been holding on all this time. That takes strength, but maybe it's time to let someone hold on with you." He swallowed hard, caught between fear and the spark of trust she had lit. For years he had survived by staying invisible, by clinging only to what was left in that suitcase. The thought of stepping into the unknown terrified him. Yet sitting there with Emma for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. A few weeks later, Emma noticed the corner was empty. The wall where George used to sit looked bare, the city rushing on as if he had never been there at all. For a moment, her chest tightened with fear. Had he given up? Had something happened? That afternoon, walking home, she passed the neighbourhood auto shop. The garage door was open, music playing faintly from a radio inside. She stopped in her tracks. There he was, George. His hair trimmed, his beard neatly shaved. He wore a plain work shirt tucked into clean jeans, his hands streaked with grease as he wiped them on a rag. He was talking with another mechanic, and for the first time Emma saw him standing tall, not hunched against a wall. Later, she found him sitting on a bench near the shop, the battered suitcase resting at his side. When he spotted her, his face broke into a smile that reached his tired but brighter eyes. "Didn't think you'd recognise me without the corner," he said with a small chuckle. Emma sat beside him, glancing at the suitcase. "Still carrying it?" George nodded, tapping the lid gently. "Some things you don't let go of." Then he grew quiet, lifting the photo from inside. His hands were steadier now as he looked at it. Finally, he held it out to Emma. "I want you to keep this, for a while. You reminded me I'm still their husband, still his father. You reminded me I'm still someone." Emma's throat tightened as she took the photograph. the weight of it heavier than paper should ever be. The city bustled around them, cars honking, people rushing past. But in that moment, everything slowed. A simple kindness had done what the world never expected. It had given a man back his dignity, his hope, and his place in the world. Sometimes, the smallest gesture can change the entire course of a life. A sandwich, a warm word, a willingness to stop when everyone else walks by. Kindness doesn't always fix everything, but it can remind someone that they still matter. So here's a question for you. If you were Emma, would you have stopped or kept walking with the crowd? Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you again soon here on Rain Inside.